This is a story of a driver with incredible grit and determination, who went through massive trials and tribulations. A driver who fought fiercely to reach Formula 1, only to be chewed up and spat out, then finally becoming the champion he deserved to be, before a life-threatening crash took it all away. A driver who overcame losing his legs in that crash to get back into a race car once again, and who went on to become a 6-time Olympic medalist. But then, tragedy struck again. This is a lesson in never giving up and always remaining positive. This is the story of Alex Zanardi. Alessandro Zanardi was born in Bologna in 1966, just 20 minutes from the Imola circuit, and he came from a regular family. His dad was a plumber and his mum was a seamstress. But Alex, he was anything but regular, especially when it came to racing and Formula 1. He and his dad would watch all of the races together, and Alex wanted to feel that speed himself. So at just 10 years old, he built a box cart with roller skates, but it didn't have an engine, so he used his dog to pull him around. And when he was a little bit older, Alex even tried to build his own go-kart using pipes and some old wheels from his dad's garage. However, it didn't really work out, but it showed just how proactive and determined Alex was, traits that you'll see throughout his life. But while Alex was still a young boy, came his first life's tragedy. In 1979, his sister, who was 2 years older, went out to get ice cream with her boyfriend, and sadly, she never came back. She was only 15 years old. The car they were in crashed into another car, and both her and her boyfriend died, although the driver survived. But it was this tragic event that led Alex towards motorsport. In his book, he mentions that his parents became extremely overprotective. Considering the circumstances, that's understandable. And with Alex being a fearless kid and always getting cuts and bruises, he noticed he was worrying his parents. They were terrified of losing another child. So, in order to ease their pain, Alex stopped taking any risks. He quit riding his bike and playing with his friends, trying to protect his parents from more grief. But it seems that his parents noticed this and didn't want to stop Alex from being Alex, the brave young boy fascinated by speed. So in the same year that his sister passed away, his father bought him a proper go-kart. But in 1980, when Alex first went to the track to watch with his dad, he was actually scared. He couldn't believe how fast the drivers were. But then when Alex took to the track himself and drove a go-kart for the first time, he realised he wanted to drive in Formula 1.
Started back in 1980 when my father bought me a go-kart. I got addicted immediately, and as funny as it could sound at the time, the first lap I took with my go-kart around the local circuit, I said, this is what I want to do in my life.
And at the kart track, Alex joined forces with 3 other kids, unofficially creating Team Svega, which means the unlucky team. It was a small team and definitely not as professional as the others on the grid. Alex's dad was a mechanic and driver coach, and his mum was the caterer and timekeeper. And to be fair, that's how my karting days were too. And I loved it. In 1982, at 15 years old, Alex moved up to the Italian National Karting Championship. But in racing terms, money was still a problem for Alex and his family. His mum even took a full-time job as a carburetor assembler to help fund his racing. And by this point, Alex had started to get noticed and managed to secure sponsorship from Sergio Mantessa, the owner of Vega Tyres, who supplied the championship. Fast forward to 1985 and Alex's driving was really taking off. It was clear he was becoming a great driver and had massive natural talent.
So that it's now the man who is on pole position, Zanardi.
In fact, he won both the Italian and the European Karting Championship that year, which was a huge result. And things went well in '86 too, as he won the national championship once again. But there was no doubt that Alex was struggling for money, and there seemed to be little hope of him progressing to the even more expensive car racing, even though he'd had plenty of success in karts. However, during this time, Zanardi had become good friends with Max Papis while karting in the European Championship, a relationship that would last for decades to come. And it was Max's dad who owned a successful business, and after seeing potential in Alex, offered him half the budget to move up to Italian F3 for the following season. But Alex still needed to find an extra 35 million lira, that's about £60,000 in today's money, not a small amount. but Alex got there and raised the extra money from another 4 sponsors. By the way, that £120,000 budget is a lot of money, but still nothing like the £700,000 or so a similar race series costs today. However, Alex's first year in F3 with the Coppuccini team didn't go all that well. He finished a best race position of 5th and ended up 16th in the championship. But as you'll see again and again in this story, Zanardi is all about persistence. The following year he worked on his driving and understanding the F3 car, and managed to pull out 2 podiums, 2 pole positions and a fastest lap. His results were looking up, and Alex was proving himself to be a serious driver. And in the 1990 season, that was confirmed. He raced the F3 series again, won a few races and finished 2nd in the championship. He also won the European F3 Cup, which was a one-off race at the Le Mans Bugatti circuit, where he beat a guy named Michael Schumacher. And this race was interesting to say the least. At the start of the race, Zanardi, Schumacher and Max Angelelli crashed into each other, with Schumi sneakily stopping his car in the middle of the circuit to get the race stopped. He could then start the race again from his original grid position, something that Schumi actually did a couple of times during his F1 career. Anyway, Schumacher did go on to win the race on track, but after the race it was proved that his car had been fitted with a different type of engine. So he was disqualified from the race, handing the win to Zanardi. And Zanardi continued his success the following year, moving into F3000, which is kind of the same as F2 nowadays. Alex managed to win 3 races that season and came 2nd in the championship. Everything was looking good. And looking back at this old footage is quite personal to me. One of the first race cars that I ever drove when I was 16 was this year of F3000. And these cars are wild. H-pattern gearboxes, incredibly stiff suspension, and they feel quite insecure as your head and shoulders are fully exposed. Anyway, Alex's speed in F3 and F3000 had finally caught the attention of the F1 teams.
Alessandro Zanardi, another Formula 3000 find, stepped into Jordan's number 32 at the expense of Roberto Moreno. The 4th driver of the car this year, a great chance for the 24-year-old Italian.
It was Alex's time to live out his childhood dream of driving in Formula 1, as he competed for Jordan in the final 3 Grand Prix of 1991. But jumping into F1 at the end of a season as a rookie is no small challenge. But it went pretty well, with Zanardi gaining 2 ninths and having a retirement, which wasn't far off his more experienced teammate. As a point of reference, this was the same year that Schumacher also jumped into the same Jordan for a single race, qualifying 7th at Spa before a DNF. But why was Schumacher in the car? Well, I don't want to bore you, but its normal driver Bertrand Gachot was in prison in England for tear gassing a taxi driver. Anyway, a decent job was done by Alex, but Jordan decided not to re-sign him for the 92 season. Instead, they chose Stefano Moderna from Tyrrell, hoping to get their main sponsor with him. So with no race options, Alex ended up as Benetton's test driver for the 92 season, and barely did any driving for the entire year. Until Christian Fittipaldi had a massive crash during qualifying for the French Grand Prix, and damaged some of his vertebrae. So he was understandably unable to continue to drive for Minardi.
Well, hopefully this is the last week I'm using, the next race.
So Zanardi was back in the seat for 3 races, perhaps with a chance to prove himself again. But that season the Minardi was a terrible car, and Alex didn't even qualify for 2 of the races and didn't finish the other. It wasn't looking good for Alex, and without having the chance to complete a full racing season, perhaps the F1 dream was slipping away. But just as it was looking like the end for Zanardi, Lotus came knocking. They'd sold Mika Hakkinen to McLaren, and they needed a driver, and Alex was on top of their list. So he took the opportunity with both hands and was finally going to be able to race in Formula 1 for an entire season for a historic team who'd been reasonably competitive the previous year, finishing 5th in the Constructors' Championship, and hopes remained high for the 1993 Lotus. It was pushing the boundaries of technology, which meant it had a lot of potential. And it wasn't just down to the fact they were using surfboards in their pit stops. There's actually much more to this than you might initially think. Just watch the front wheels pick themselves up. And that's because this car, like the famous Williams FW14B, had active suspension. That's suspension that could change its own ride heights on each corner of the car to maximise aerodynamic grip, It was revolutionary in Formula 1. Before, of course, it was banned. But it was incredibly complex technology for 1993, and the season didn't start well, with a 6th, an 8th, a 14th, a 7th and an 11th, and a load of retirements in the first 11 races. Meanwhile, Alex's teammate, a young Johnny Herbert, was faring better with 3/4 and many top 10s. Granted, the car wasn't reliable and difficult to drive, but Herbert was outperforming Alex in the same car. And then, this happened.
This morning, Alessandro Zanardi had a huge shunt in the Eau Rouge corner going up to the hill towards Radion. There we see it again, and John, before we start talking about this morning, this was a massive shunt. It was the biggest shunt I've seen all year.
This was during practice at the Belgian Grand Prix and was apparently because the active suspension on the Lotus had a problem. Just imagine what it's like driving into Eau Rouge with 1990 safety standards and the car not doing what you'd expect. It was a malfunction at the very worst time, and Alex smashed into the barrier. And when he finally came to a standstill and the medics got to him, he was unconscious. These old F1 cars have very little in the way of side and head protection, and Alex was lucky to survive, but he was going to be out of the car for some time. And although doctors had given him the green light for the last 3 races of the season, Lotus team bosses had convinced Alex to give up the race seat in order, as his book puts it, to do them a favour. However, that favour wasn't to be returned, as in the off-season, the same team bosses fired Zanardi, explaining that although he'd been very fast, he'd had too many accidents, and Herbert had simply collected more points. So he was out of a seat with nowhere to drive. But as was more common in that era of Formula 1, he was about to substitute for another driver, after Pedro Lamy had a monumental crash while testing at Silverstone. Lamy survived but broke both legs and wrists. And this is a moment to take a breath and be thankful for the improvements in F1 safety nowadays. This Lotus was destroyed. So Zanardi was back in a car, but the Lotus team was struggling for cash and the car was slow. The team was in absolute turmoil, cycling through 7 drivers in that one season. However, Alex's driving was improving, especially considering the little time he had in the car. And he finished the rest of the season, where he was swapped for a driver who was paid to be there.
He wasn't getting paid and Lotus was in financial trouble, and then they actually stopped him racing and got some other drivers in who were paying.
Lotus were in deep financial trouble. This was the end for the British team, who hadn't been competitive for a good number of years. And the team officially shut down at the end of the 94 season, leaving Alex yet again without a seat. And to make things worse, 3 days before Alex had left for the penultimate race of the year, his father had died after a long battle with cancer, and he was only 54 years old. Alex was having an incredibly difficult time personally and was out of a Formula 1 seat. Once again, his career was looking like it might be over. But as we keep on seeing with Alex, he picked himself up and drove forwards. In 95, he competed in a couple of European GT races, but now his focus was on the USA, and in particular, the kart series.
Welcome as IndyCar is ready to start their season as Toyota presents the Grand Prix of Miami.
So it was 1996 and Alex was back to full-time racing in the kart championship, or Championship Auto Racing Teams. Terrible name, but awesome cars. Absolute monsters. 2.65 litre turbocharged V8s with between 750 and 900 horsepower. These cars were rapid and the racing was incredible. And this time Zanardi was with a leading team, Ganassi. He was actually in a car that could win races. And after a lackluster F1 career, he still had something to prove. And he made an impression. In only his second race in Brazil, he took the pole position and finished 4th in the race. That's very impressive. Kart cars were very different to F1 cars of the time, but it's even more impressive when you consider that this was on an oval and not a road course. Now, Alex was celebrating in 1996, and it wasn't just about his recent win in karts. Apparently, he was also celebrating the first public release of Opera, Yes, the browser. But Opera has come a long way in 27 years and is now fully featured for privacy, security and everything you do online. It's faster, safer and smarter than default browsers. And all their handy features improve my daily online experience and productivity. It's got a built-in music player and integrated messengers, allowing me to switch music or quickly reply to messages without leaving the browser. You can enjoy private browsing and hide your location with the built-in VPN. It's free, unlimited, and best of all, it doesn't collect your information. One of my favourite features is tab islands. I love how tabs can be easily arranged into separate groups or islands, which can be collapsed or expanded. Tab islands is a simple and intuitive way to keep your browsing sessions separate, if, like me, you like to have hundreds of pages open. You even get access to a leading generative AI called Aria. Aria is easily accessible in the sidebar and gives you clear answers instantly. And it's connected to the web, meaning you're provided with real-time information. So if you'd also like to experience faster, distraction-free browsing, click the link in the description below. And with that, back to the video. Back to Alex. You might think that the ovals are just turning left, but they are way more difficult than you might expect. I actually went from European style tracks to ovals when I raced in the US. And to be honest, when the car is good, driving flat out in a circle isn't really all that hard. But in order to be fast, you have to have the car set up in a way that means the rear is really loose. And when the rear is loose, you're always on the edge of having a crash. And on ovals, you don't have small crashes. Anyway, it was in Alex's 9th ever race in kart that he got pole position again, and this time he won. In fact, in that second half of the season, he was the top point scorer with 3 wins, 2 seconds and a third. And he eventually finished the season in 3rd overall and the highest placed rookie by a mile. Alex was a sensation in kart, finally getting the success he'd worked so hard for and proving the F1 teams wrong. But winning a few races wasn't enough for Zanardi. He wanted to be champion. So with his $1 million contract signed for the 97 season, Zanardi and Ganassi had their eyes on the championship. And first 2 races of the season were only okay, with a 7th and a 4th. Not quite as good as the previous season might have indicated, but winning a championship is all about consistency, and by round 3 at Long Beach, Alex had stepped things up and took the victory. Alex was now building on the momentum of the previous season and was a real title contender. This victory meant a lot to him, and it was a historic race for another reason as well. This was the race that Zanardi did the first ever celebratory donut, but it represented much more. It showed his new mindset, full of confidence and adding his own unique flair to racing.
You did a donut down there in turn 1. What was that all about?
The crowd here were amazing, and I had to please them a little bit also. So it's races to win, but this now is our, and nobody's going to steal it from us.
And Zanardi went on to win 5 times that year with a total of 11 top 5 finishes in 17 races. That's a lot of celebrating and a lot of donuts. So many that Zanardi became known as the Donut King. And with all those wins and a 33-point lead, Zanardi was the 1997 kart champion. And he signed again with Ganassi for 98. And by this time they were feeling like an unstoppable force. The Ganassi team knew Alex and Alex knew the team. Everything was harmonious. The season started off with a solid 3rd position at the Grand Prix of Miami, but then he had a crash in the second race. However, things turned around from round 3 where he won the Grand Prix of Long Beach again and then went on to get another 15 podiums, including 7 wins and 5 fastest laps. It's fair to say that Alex dominated the 1998 season, gaining 285 points. 116 more than Jimmy Vasser in second. So he was back-to-back kart champion. He was becoming a legend in the US, and his son Nicolo was born in September of that year. 1998 had gone well. Now, that isn't to say that everything was perfect. Alex's wheel-to-wheel racing was pretty strong and he was involved in a few incidents. In fact, Alex was put on probation and fined $50,000, a record fine for a kart driver at the time, and something that Alex didn't think was fair. Anyway, he was still back-to-back champion and it would have been an easy decision to continue in kart. But Alex doesn't care about easy, and he still had a bone to pick with Formula 1. He felt like he still had something to prove. And with his new son, life had changed. His wife missed Europe and was worried about the danger involved with oval racing. So he decided to pursue Formula 1 yet again. He'd spoken to several teams, including Jordan and Prost, but it was Williams who had his attention. Williams was still in their period of Formula 1 success, having won the World Championship with Hill in '96 and Villeneuve, who'd also come from US racing, in '97. And they were still quick in '98, finishing third in the Constructors' Championship. So he signed a 3-year deal with Williams, lining up against the younger Schumacher brother, Ralph. However, all was not well. Zanardi, in an F1 car that was very different to the kart car, struggled for pace, with his teammate regularly out-qualifying him. And Zanardi puts this down to a mistake he made with his driving style. He was trying to change the Williams' setup to suit his driving style, rather than changing his driving style to suit the Williams. On top of that, he had a load of mechanical failures in the unreliable Williams. This was not a good season for Zanardi, scoring 0 points, while his teammate Schumacher was 6th in the standings. Again, Formula 1 hadn't been kind to Alex. It had once again chewed him up and spat him out. He hadn't enjoyed his experience and was actually considering retiring completely, but he just couldn't end on the low of 1999. So he took the year 2000 to reflect on his racing and spend time with his family. But what did he really want to do? F1 was no longer an option, but he did have options in kart. So in 2001, in an effort to get back to winning ways, Zanardi signed with Monan Racing, founded by a former Ganassi team member. But the team were really struggling. There was a new rule in kart that limited testing, which meant only 10 days of testing across the entire season, and none once the season was underway. And this was a problem, as the Monan team were only in their 2nd year of racing, meaning they needed as much testing time as possible to understand how to get the most out of the car. And the car just wasn't quick, and Alex was struggling again. In the first 3 quarters of the season, his best result was a 4th, but that was really only a one-off, and actually his average finishing position was 17th. Then it was time for round 16 of the season, and the first time the kart series had been to Europe, for a race at the Euro Speedway Lausitzring, a circuit that I raced on a few years later. It was a difficult time for the American race series, as it took place on the 15th of September 2001, just days after the New York attacks. And in a moment when all the other major US sporting events cancelled, kart continued. And this was a circuit that had seen tragedy that year, with Michele Alboreto dying in an accident while testing for Le Mans. And if that wasn't enough, things became more difficult for the drivers. It was raining on the Friday, and so qualifying was cancelled. That meant the grid was set by championship position, and that Alex was starting 22nd. But once the race got underway, things, for the first time that year, were going well. Alex was driving incredibly well and managed to work his way up to 1st position.
I was enjoying myself a lot because for the first time in the year, I felt the car responding to my inputs.
On lap 142, with just 13 laps and 25 miles to go, Alex came into the pits for a quick splash and dash, and he had enough time to be sure he was going to come back out in the lead.
The advantage I had prior to the pit stop is pure mathematics. I was gonna regain the lead and win the race.
So Alex sped away from the pit lane, and it was just at this moment that everything went wrong. As he left the pit lane, he got some wheel spin and the car started to slide. And in his book, he says he still doesn't know why that happened, although he suspects there was oil and dirt on the track.
I'm spinning and I can see my hands desperately reaching the steering wheel to try to control the car.
Alex actually span across the pit lane exit, but then went onto the live track. Meanwhile, Patrick Carpentier was travelling towards him at 225 miles per hour, but managed to react quickly and avoided him. However, the next car, Alex Tagliani, wasn't so lucky and hit Alex.
The most devastating crash I've ever seen, without question. It was like a bomb had gone off.
The impact of Tagliani's car was into the front side of Zanardi's. It ripped off the front of the carbon monocoque, as well as both of Alex's legs. It was a brutal accident, and Alex was lucky to be alive.
The first thing I did was promptly slip and fall onto my hands and knees. I thought I slipped and fell in oil from the car as I approached the car, but it was blood.
The medics were on site in less than 20 seconds, and now their job was to stop the bleeding and get him to hospital. He was airlifted to a hospital in Berlin, but on the way his heart stopped a number of times. He then went into surgery for 7.5 hours and lost almost all of his blood. Things weren't looking good, but he had survived. Alex was in a coma. But when he woke up, his mentality was still solid.
My first question was, I wonder how the hell I'm gonna do all the things that I have to do now with no legs. But like, I had no doubt in my mind that I was gonna do it.
What a legend. This is true Zanardi. He just never gives up and is so positive, even when he's just lost his legs. But he did have a huge challenge in front of him. He needed to finish up healing, and then there was a small matter of learning to walk again on some new legs. And once he did, he wanted to get straight back into a race car. And more than that, he wanted to go and finish the remaining laps from 2001. So just 2 years after his massive crash, Alex went back to Germany and in front of a huge crowd finished off that race.
And now here he is, back in Germany, completing the 13 laps that went unfinished back in 2001. Operating the throttle with his left thumb, the clutch with his right hand, and most remarkable of all, working the brake with his artificial right leg, using the strength of his hip. And as we all know by now, Alex Zanardi has enormous reserves of strength.
And Alex wasn't just driving a demonstration run here. He got in and was pushing hard. In fact, his best lap was fast enough to have qualified 5th on the grid for the 2001 race. Just imagine the mentality that would take. The last time you were in a car, you lost both of your legs and almost died. And then you go back to the same track in the same car and pull out a time that's quick enough for the 3rd row of the grid. It was genuinely mind-blowing, but doing some fast laps wasn't enough for Alex. He wanted more, he wanted competition, he wanted to win again. So in 2003, he teamed up with BMW Italy Spain for a one-off race in the final round of the European Touring Car Championship. Alex had only done a couple of days of testing in this car, so he did feel quite unprepared in the sense he was still trying to figure out the car. But of course, he was just happy to be competing again.
I found absolutely normal for me to, to put myself again in the fight and try to have another taste of it,
And you might think that adapting to hand controls would be difficult, being using his feet to control the speed of the car for so many years. But again, Alex found a way.
Since after my accident, I have realized, when you're forced to do something not the way you always did it previously in your life, because you have no option, you adapt a mental flexibility that wasn't yours before.
So how did that first race go at Monza? Well, out of a grid of 23 cars, including famous names like Fisichella, Tarquini and Prio, Alex finished a remarkable 7th. He hadn't lost any of his speed. And Alex wanted more for the following year, but decided he really wanted to get to know the cars. So he stuck with the Division 2 of the European Touring Car Championship, competing in 7 races and coming 14th in the championship. But it was 2005 that Alex returned to winning ways, getting single victories in both the World and European Touring Car Championships, and also winning 8 races in the lesser known Italian Super Turismo series, where he also took the championship. These were Alex's first wins since 1998. He was back, and yet again he'd proved himself after it looked like it was all over. He continued racing in touring cars, focusing on the World Touring Car Championship all the way up to 2009. And while he never won a championship, he took a race win in 3 out of those 4 years and scored 8 podiums. He was legitimately running at the front of the pack. And as a bonus, he also got behind the wheel of a specially modified Sauber F1 car at the Valencia circuit.
This butterfly to allow me to power the car. So this is my throttle. By pulling this lever like this, I power the car. So as you can see, it's pretty complicated steering wheel.
But it wasn't just motorsport that Alex was competing in. Back in 2007, he was introduced to hand cycling when he was booked to speak at an event in connection with the New York Marathon. And in typical Alex style, he thought, if I'm going to speak, I might as well compete. So after just 4 weeks of training, he in fact did compete. And he finished 4th in the whole hand cycle class. What an incredible result. And it was here that Alex got the bug for competitive cycling. And in fact, he wanted to do it more than racing cars.
At the end of 2009, I went to the headquarters of BMW in Milan to announce that my desire was to put everything on hold as far as my motorsports career, in order to find the time to train harder.
And I think the thing here is that Alex just loves competition. And what he loves even more is competing at the highest level. And that's exactly what he did here. In 2009, he won the Venice Marathon. In 2010, he won the Rome Marathon. And in 2011, he won the New York Marathon. Alex had become a serious athlete. But as always, he wanted more. And the 2012 London Olympics were on the horizon. And so Alex entered and incredibly went on to take gold in both the H4 individual road race and the time trial, and silver in the mixed team relay. What an amazing result. And just like his kart championship 15 years earlier, Alex was once again the best in the game. And I think it was that feeling that he was chasing. So Alex continued cycling, winning the Road World Championship in both road race and time trial in 2013, and in time trial again in 2014. By this time, Alex was in his mid-40s, but his sights were once again on the Olympics, this time in Rio in 2016, by which time he'd be 45 years old. And he won again, with a gold in the H4 individual time trial, a silver in the H4 individual road race, and another gold in the mixed team relay. Alex had now won 6 Olympic medals, and then in 2018 went on to break the Ironman triathlon world record, while coming 5th overall in that competition. Alex's competitive spirit and pure grip had made him succeed, and it seemed that whatever he turns his attention to, he was going to make a success. It's a truly inspirational story, and I wish that was the end of this video. But in June 2020, Zanardi was competing in a race in Siena when he lost control during a downhill section of the track and crashed into a truck. Now, there's conflicting views on whose fault it was, but ultimately, Alex's life was in critical danger once again. He'd managed to survive the crash, but was put into a coma as doctors treated his severe head and face injuries, and he needed to go under many surgeries. It was only 5 months later that he could see and hear again. In fact, recovery was slow. He was in hospital for a total of 18 months before returning home, where recovery continued. But then in July 2022, he went back into hospital after a solar panel malfunctioned and caused a fire that damaged his medical equipment. He then stayed in hospital for a further 76 days. Alex is now once again at home and in recovery. And the latest comment I could find about him is from his wife, who explains that the recovery process is long, but seeing steady progress. And she actually says that Alex proves again and again that he is a real fighter. And this, as we know, couldn't be more true. Alex Zanardi has had a remarkable life, but the consistent thread is that he never gives up. So Alex, please keep on fighting, keep on pushing. You have many more laps to complete. And thank you for your inspiration.